I don't know if I'll be able to share them unless you hold them up. So what I wanted to just mention is that, so again, back in the 1990s, email was brand new for a lot of us. And it was an exciting time because we never had the internet before. And it opened up a lot of doors. And it was at first a novelty, the World Wide Web and the internet. But then email came along, and that's thanks to American Online. And so my presentation is entitled ChatGPT from the AOL age to the AI age. And back in the AOL age, American Online age, it was amazing what we could do. It just opened up the whole world to us. And during that time, Bosnia, the war in Bosnia had just taken off. And we were getting emails every day from the field, talking about what was going on, who needed help, things like that. And it stirred up a whole community. I was just a student at the time, and it got hundreds and thousands of people concerned about Bosnia and interested in ways of helping out. And what somebody generated, right now, OpenAI has created, here we are. Thank you so much, David, apologies. So we're here at AOL. We'll go to slide number 2, the logo of AOL. Thank you, everyone. So this is kind of right now it looks retro, but I wanted to point out that back then this was an amazing thing, a brand new thing. And we'll go to the next slide, and we have our email. So, the interface of the email interface was quite primitive looking back, but back then it was a brand new thing in the same way that ChatGPT and generative AI is brand new now. So we'll go to the next slide. And what somebody had done is they'd realized that you could actually share information. This is, I don't expect people to read this, but what I wanted to point out is that people started to come together and create information sharing networks to share information about what was going on. And what this is, the text, it's for refugees to share information about what's going on and to help coordinate aid activities. And this was a brand new thing to them. They say it crosses boundaries and ethnic barriers. And this is exceptionally powerful. And when we think of today in Colombia and elsewhere around the world, these hard to reach places, this is what people were striving to do back in the 1990s. So you can go to the next slide. Thank you. So the next slide, and this is just our last busy slide here, but what I wanted to point out is that somebody came up with this great idea, and it was called an email list serve. And again, this is the equivalent of ChatGPT and AI then. And what it is, it's just a simple way for all of us to share emails, and it gets aggregated onto a list and turned into HTML code so that we can all read it like a journal. And in this text, they talk about this brand new experimental thing, and it's barely stable. And, again, it's like AI today. And like when we think of humanitarian AI, this is a mirror of the early days that we saw. And then one more slide. So in Bosnia, there was a network called Bosnet, and this is what I got involved in. And as you can see, this is an email listserv, and we have, it was fighting in Kosovo, the Kosovo conflict at the time. And it talks about the flight of people from a conflict zone. And we think about, again, needs today, and how do we get information across? How do we make what's invisible visible? And we were able to do this in the 1990s, 1998. And here's an example of fresh reports from the field with the very sort of contextual information about what was going on and who needs what. So we'll go to the next screen. And so this actually stirred me to action. I left the university studies and I ended up in Bosnia. And here I ended up in Kosovo. And this is my last slide of this time period. But as you can see, back then we could already tell where refugees were fleeing to, which countries, Macedonia, Albania, into Bosnia. And people started coming together to set up refugee camps. So I actually ended up working just down the road from this refugee camp, all because somebody was able to leverage email and do something innovative around creating these sort of list serves, these email newsletters of sorts that brought people together. So I wanted to point out is that, on a local level, it might be hard you might get discouraged about what can we do that's realistic. But here's a perfect example about leveraging technology for good, bringing people together and doing something. So let's go to the next slide. So now we have something called ChatGPT, and this is ChatGPT's logo. And you could think about it in contrast to American Online. American Online was sort of heavily branded, but it was right for the time. And this logo for OpenAI, it's more of a cursor. It's designed to be very, very small, and this is the larger version of it. But it's a sign of the times that we use our computers to interact and ask questions, and it's really just a prompt. So we'll go to the next slide. So in terms of today, I thought I'd use Colombia as an example. And I did my studies in the peace negotiations. I did a master's of humanitarian operations, and I studied the peace demands of the rebels in Colombia as well as Nepal. And the peace negotiations were recently, successfully completed in Colombia. But we still have areas in Colombia where it is dangerous and it is difficult for local level people. They're still trapped in a way. So here's a map of these areas. So we're going to talk about ChatGPT, and I'm going to use this as an example. So just think about where are the concentrations of people who are essentially confined in their local areas, their local villages, and hard to reach. So we'll go to the next slide. So this map came from an article. And so we're going to reference this article using ChatGPT and kind of demonstrate how we can use artificial intelligence to learn about people in need and how we can help. So this article is written by Brian Ibas, and it talks about 5 years after the peace in Colombia, communities are still living in forced confinement. And just notice the people in this photo, and it's, what can I hope to do to help them? They're so far away, and it's a very difficult situation. And, we might not even try, but if these people could communicate their needs to us, maybe the same thing would happen that happened in Bosnia and Kosovo. People would help them, people would respond and do their best to try to improve their situation. So let's go to the next slide. So we have, this is a ChatGPT prompt. And again, for this talk, I just wanted to emphasize how we can use these new modalities to try to help people and to try to share information. So with ChatGPT and prompting, it's good to kind of define what you're interested in versus just having an open-ended question like, how can I help? Who needs my help in the world? It's better to start with a thematic. So here we started with Brian's article, and we ask about, how our communities in Colombia, what do they need? Are they living in forced confinement? And then ChatGPT, this generative AI model, was able to bring up a summary of this article. And so what this does with email back in the 1990s, you receive emails and you reply to them. But with ChatGPT, you're talking to a robot and you need to prep it and familiarize it with what you'd like to talk about. So we use this article to familiarize ourselves with a context like people in need in Colombia. So we'll go to the next slide. So we're going to do about 4 slides that are just a prompt thread and kind of learn about open data sharing and what generative AI can do to help humanitarian actors. So the next prompt it's called a persona. You say, ChatGPT, you are a humanitarian relief worker. Describe which types of basic services are needed most in rural areas of Colombia, particularly in this department that was referenced in this article. And here we go. ChatGPT was able to generate from who knows where, the internet, a decent summary about what's needed in these areas. And think again about this photo that we saw earlier. These people, it's very difficult for them and they're very remote, but we were able to learn a certain amount about them and their needs. So we'll go to the next slide. So we're just drilling into this information, and it's just amazing what we can get compared to the 90s. So let's test ChatGPT. There's local level organizations working there, and let's see what we can learn about them. So I asked ChatGPT to describe some names, and I'm testing it to see if it could actually find some people, some organizations working in these areas. And it was actually able to pull up several local level organizations that are trying their best to help. And this is quite interesting. So we're proving that artificial intelligence is able to generate this information for us based on the whole World Wide Web of information. So we'll go to the next slide, if that's okay. So now let's find out what these organizations need. And again, think about me back in the Bosnia days. You know, I'd like to help refugees in Kosovo fleeing across the border. And as a humanitarian actor, I'm prompting ChatGPT to learn about what sort of needs are on, what do people need on the ground, to think about how I can help. So here we are, we asked ChatGPT what's needed, and I was able to get quite an interesting summary of the types of needs. Let's go on to the next slide. So I have about 4 more of these slides, 3 more, and then we'll be done and we'll talk more about it. So I mentioned this open data sharing framework called IATI, and it's a powerful way to get more information in front of ChatGPT. Otherwise, ChatGPT just relies on the internet. And what I want to do is point out the importance of sharing information through these open data sharing frameworks. So I ask for reference who's working in these areas only using aid activity data. So we have an answer here, and it was able to pull up these organizations. So David, if you go to the next slide, and we have 2 more, and then I'm going to go to these slides, and I'm going to go back and ask if any of these local level organizations are listed. And ChatGPT actually tells us, no, I can't find anything about these organizations. And if you go to the next slide, I ask, well, how would reporting via IATI actually benefit these organizations? And what I'm told by ChatGPT is that artificial intelligence applications, they need structured data, and they can benefit from structured data. So if these organizations actually share their information in a structured way, artificial intelligence applications can pick it up. So let's go to the next slide. Now we're going to think about, well, we've just learned that, how can I help? So you can go on to the next slide, David. This last slide, it really just talks more about how AI and open data sharing can improve visibility of local level organizations. And this slide, I won't go into it, but the point is that in order to publish information through IATI, you need to turn it into XML code, a computer code, and publish it. And this describes how to do that. And that sounds very daunting. So we'll go to the next slide, and we ask, well, who can help us? And how about Mercy Corps? We learned earlier that Mercy Corps is working in these areas in Colombia. So how can Mercy Corps help organizations in Colombia report their information through IATI? So how can Mercy Corps help local level organizations leverage AI? So we'll go to the next slide. So this is a great example of a project, a way to help local level organizations. You can actually get organizations like Mercy Corps to help local level organizations learn how to report their activities. And let's go another slide here. So this previous slide, so here's an example of a third-party platform that's very simple to use. So if you're an organization in Colombia and you want to report your activities and you want to do it through open data sharing frameworks, here's the third-party application. And our last 3 slides, you can go to those. I'm just showing you what an aid activity file looks like. And this is my closing point that I'd like to make. It looks very daunting, kind of like how email looked back in the 1990s. It's just some computer code. But these are very simple fields. You have a title of an activity, you have a description, a location, who's involved. And so in closing, I wanted to point out that this is fairly easy, but in the generative AI age, in the AI age that we're in now, it's crucially important if you want to help local level organizations, or if you are one, that you get your information out into the public domain, coded properly for artificial intelligence applications. So that's my my pitch here to everybody. It says, and then here's, there are just 2 more slides. And I just want to point out that this is just fairly simple. We just have 3 slides, that the information could be simpler or longer. And there's tons of information fields you can use in a granular level to get across what you need. And if you do this, you might actually get somebody like me from far away coming and helping you do something on the ground like we did in Kosovo. So thank you, everyone. I hope this helps. And I really tried my best to think about, you know, again, this context that we're in and how do we help local level organizations and leverage AI and leverage open data sharing.